Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Filmmaking, Actually. Ta-da! So for this, I wanted to go over how do you finance your film, actually. Now, this is a very, very, very wide topic. I could probably talk for hours on each individual thing. I wanted to give an overall scope for people who are like, how do I do this? What are my options? What do I do? You may have heard of all of these or some of these. Hopefully the individual breakdown is helpful. Now, I will say there is one thing that I'm not going to talk about in this episode, and that is something called tax credits or tax incentives, tax breaks, etc., tax rebates, all that stuff. The reason why I'm not going into it is for two reasons, actually. One is because it's not available everywhere and it isn't available to everyone. The point of this podcast is for things that are available to everyone, things that everybody can do. Tax credits, tax incentives, all of that. Basically, sometimes local governments or state governments will give you money back. So, you spend $500,000 in their city and they give you $50,000 for filming there. Or you spend $500,000 in their city and they give you a $50,000 tax credit. So whatever taxes would have been paid on the film, now there's $50,000 that can go towards that. Sometimes it's what's called a rebate. Sometimes it's a credit. There's lots of different ins and outs of it, but basically that's what that is. If you want more information about tax credits specifically, you can look them up by just searching, does whatever area offer any tax credits, tax incentives, etc., and then it usually can explain it pretty straightforwardly on the website for the local film office, film commission, etc. That said, some of these areas are a little more regulated than others. Now, I'm not a lawyer and nothing in this is legal advice. I'm just sharing my experience and the things that I've learned over the years so that it at least gives you a baseline of where to start. I will say if you're based in the United States, there's something called the SEC, and that is the Securities and Exchange Commission. Securities are basically just a thing that has to do with investments and investing. And when you're dealing with certain volumes of money and certain types of agreements, when it comes to investments specifically, it is regulated by the SEC. So make sure that you are in compliance with those regulations. If you're in other countries, there are other regulations or there might not be other regulations. I'm definitely not familiar with the laws around the world. I just know the United States for the most part. For this, I will start by just defining what each one is and talking a little bit about what the options are for those different ways of financing your film. The one that we all pretty much hear about all the time is investors. How do I get investors? Where do I get investors from? Etc. Investors basically invest money. They take money, they put it into the project, and once the project is completed and sold, they get their money back, and they usually get a return on their investment. It just depends on what the terms are, what the legal requirements are. There actually are limits, at least in the United States, with regard to how much somebody can get back. Like you can't give someone a 300% return on their investment. It is a highly regulated area and there are specific laws. So make sure if you have any questions, you consult with someone who's qualified to answer those questions. The intention of an investment is that the money will be repaid to the investor with a return. So they give you $5, maybe they get $6 back. Investors usually also share a percentage of the film's profits, and that percentage is usually defined by the producers or the owners of the film. Investors do expect their money back. When you have investors, you have a responsibility not only to sell the film, but also to sell it for a profit so that they get their money back and they get a little extra. As far as where to find investors, there's 50 billion trillion jillion different links on the internet, people selling classes. This is how you find investors, blah, 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 blah. I say network. There is an episode that we have on networking. Anyone can be an investor if they have money to invest in your film. You just have to connect with them. You just have to talk to them. You have to find them. They might be at film festivals. They might be at, you never know. I see classes where they're like, get your dentist to invest. I mean, I don't know if I've never seen a dentist invest personally, but other people have. So it just has to be a connection, some sort of person who has the funds and is looking to put that funds in something where they hope to get a return and they choose to support a film project with their investment. Another way of funding your film is grants. Grants is money which is granted, meaning it's just given. It's given to the filmmaker or it's given to the film project. There often are terms for the funds, such as you can only spend the money in a certain way. For example, we have a grant from the Montana Film Office, which is amazing, and they're amazing. But we have to spend that money in Montana. I can't use it to hire a film crew in Texas. It has to go to Montana. There also sometimes are promotional items. For example, you might be required to showcase certain physical landmarks or signage or things like that that make it clear that the film was filmed in a certain area. Sometimes you have to put logos on screen or put certain things into the credits. You might see this film was supported by the Vancouver Film Office or whatever. It's very possible that those filmmakers got a grant from Vancouver, or they might have had some other incentive that required that graphic, or the filmmakers were just supported by Vancouver and so they're shouting them out in the end credits. Sometimes grantors will ask for things like a copy of the film that either they can keep or that they can use for their own promotion, or they can use to hold special screenings, things like that. But usually when you get a grant, there's a contract involved and there are obligations which have to be met. I will say one of the other things that I didn't dive into too much on this because it also requires a lot of contracts is general sponsorship. People who put money towards the film, or they give you things such as, maybe you get sponsored by Applebee's and then all of the scenes in the restaurant take place in Applebee's, and Applebee's, you show their menu items or whatever. Or I'm sure you've seen in TV or in movies where people are like, oh, I love Little Debbie's. They just mention it. And I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. I probably should be if I'm giving them shout outs. But it basically is people give you money for product placement. It's kind of like a form of advertising. I didn't go into that because there are specific contracts you have to have for that as well. And it can be a little niche. And honestly, for independent film, unless you specifically either are really good at networking with local businesses and you have local businesses that see a value in contributing to your film and they have the resources to contribute, it's not necessarily a fantastic way for an independent film without any big names to get funding. It can be. You can always try it. But these are kind of the most successful ways for independent filmmakers. The next one is loans. Loans are just like any loan. It's money loaned by an individual or organization, a bank or another entity for a set time period, usually with interest charged, which must be paid back either by a certain date or when certain conditions are met. For example, you could have a loan for 6 months, or you could have a loan until you get other money in. There's something called a bridging loan, where someone gives you a little bit of money towards the ability to then get more money, and when you get that more money, you have to pay the other people back. Again, this is also a regulated area, but it is a way to fund a film. Loans can be given to a business or to an individual. The terms of the loan can vary, and they are also under regulations, like I said, but that's kind of the baseline of it. With a loan, you do have to pay it back. Grants do not have to be paid back. Investors do have to be paid back. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're funding. A fiscal sponsorship. Fiscal sponsorship, fiscal just meaning finance, and sponsorship meaning to sponsor or to support someone. A fiscal sponsorship is a nonprofit organization which sponsors the film or project so that donations can be made for a tax deduction up to 100% of the value of the donation. The sponsor in turn grants the money to the film or project, keeping a percent for operating costs. The donor gets a tax write-off. The filmmaker gets the funds, which often have obligations or stipulations like other grants. So we have a fiscal sponsorship with the Utah Film Center, which they're another amazing organization. If someone makes a donation to the Utah Film Center in our name, the Utah Film Center will keep a percentage of that donation, and we will be granted the balance of that donation. So basically, we get a grant from them. There are things that are required to receive fiscal sponsorships. Usually the project has to be specifically non-commercial, or it has to be done in such a way that it's helping a community or it serves a greater cause than just, hey, we're going to make money. And then usually the sponsor will have some sort of connection to the film going forward. In the case of the Utah Film Center, they're allowed to screen our film. We agreed to have filmmakers come out and do a Q&A panel. They focus specifically on bringing film to communities that don't usually have access to filmmaking. So part of the agreement is that they're able to screen our film. The filmmakers will come out and do a Q&A to that community. So honestly, I was like, I would do that without a fiscal sponsorship. I love supporting people who want to learn more about film. But for a fiscal sponsorship, basically you or your film is partnering with a nonprofit organization that is able to take donations in your name and then give you a grant. They do not expect the money back. As a matter of fact, if someone who donates through a fiscal sponsor, and this is a US situation, I'm not sure how it works in other countries, but in the United States, you cannot get a tax write-off if you received a benefit. So like you can't invest through a fiscal sponsorship because you're getting a return and it's no longer a donation. It's now an investment or a purchase. All right, crowdfunding. You may love or hate this word, but it actually can be a fantastic way to raise money, especially for independent filmmakers. Crowdfunding is exactly what it sounds like. Money raised from a crowd of people through a platform such as Seed and Spark, Indiegogo, Kickstarter. Fun note, I personally highly recommend Seed and Spark. They actually have a class for filmmakers where they can teach you all of the sort of ins and outs of crowdfunding in about an hour and a half. It's pretty basic, but they also go into really important things like how do you define your audience? And I did a whole episode on this already, but it really, really helps to have your audience really clearly defined. They also go over what it takes to do a crowdfund. You know, you don't just put up a link and then woohoo, all the money just comes to you. Like it's work, just like anything. But Seed and Spark has a very high success rate. They're really supportive of filmmakers. You can actually get grants from their donors. It's a cool platform. Anyway, so crowdfunds basically are a high volume of people contribute smaller amounts of money, and then that adds up to the total amount needed to make the film. The donors often get perks or thank yous or gifts for their contributions. You know, they might get a copy of the film if the film's getting, distributed in a physical medium, or they might get t-shirts or thank you cards or stickers or access links or invites to screenings or premieres or, cookies. Like there's all sorts of fun things you can do when you're doing a crowdfund. And those people do not get their money back. So when you crowdfund, you don't owe anyone at the end of it, other than whatever obligations you have for giving them their thank yous and things like that. All right, I saved this one for last. Self-funding. Self-funding is using one's own money to cover the expenses of a project. This could be through your own cash, your own credit cards, or your own credit lines, which are technically types of loans, but this would be where you're doing it yourself. It also could be things like personal resources, such as using a personally owned camera, wardrobe items, locations, or other things to save cash needed for the project. As a note, when you're budgeting a project, every single item that should be a financed item does still go on the budget. If you provided your own wardrobe, maybe you didn't have to pay for it, but it still has value. If you provided your own camera, maybe you saved $10,000 in a camera rental, but that's still your camera. It still has value. So when you hear someone say they made a film for $500, they really didn't. They might have made it for $500 cash, but that means that either someone gave them or they were able to use their own camera, they were able to use their own locations. Usually they weren't paying people. So it's really important to make sure that when you self-fund or when you kind of fund through getting things, not just by actually having cash, that you keep track of that stuff, because you really shouldn't make a quote unquote profit off of things that technically should have been paid for, especially if it's people's labor. I did talk about this in another episode about how you make a $0 movie, actually. All right, so you may or may not get your money back when you self-fund. A lot of times people self-fund passion projects or their first film or, a smaller project or something that they just want to get made. You may or may not get your money back. It depends a lot on what happens with it. If it gets distributed, what your other contracts are. That's a maybe as far as money coming back. I will add a note when it comes to tax credits. There are people who will tell you that they will give you your first in, meaning the first money to come into the film, if you give them all of the tax credits. Sometimes that's not a good idea. Let's say they're like, oh, we'll give you $100,000 and you give us $100,000 tax credit, and then you can keep the profit. That's all we want. That's great. But if your budget is $700,000, you just lost your $100,000 tax credit you could have used for an investor towards their $700,000. So make sure when you're giving away your bargaining chips, you know what you're doing. It's a lot. There's a lot more than I'm going to be able to cover in the short podcast episode. It's way more than I'm going to cover in an infographic. But the reason why I wanted to just lay this out is because hopefully, if you're looking into funding, now at least you have some places to start. You can go research fiscal sponsorships. You can go research grants. And to be clear, you can get grants as an artist in general. You can get grants for a specific film. You can get grants for a business. You can get grants for so many different things. So going out there, researching, looking into loan options, looking into crowdfund options, looking into investment options. Now, at least, hopefully, it's not just a get money, but now it's a little bit more like, okay, you can have somewhat of a map. I hope this is really helpful. If you have any questions, please let us know. Over to you, Spacey.
You've been listening to Filmmaking Actually with Cora Linda, Space Dream Productions podcast. Subscribe to us on any or all the podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, leave us 5-star ratings and positive reviews on iTunes. It helps more listeners like you discover the show. But the best thing you can do if you really like the show is tell a friend. Want to leave a comment or ask a question? Email at filmmakingactually@gmail.com. This is Spacey speaking, and remember,
what do you recommend I do to stay out of debt?
Don't buy anything.
Where should I put my money so it'll grow?
In your pocket.
If I put it in my pocket, it'll grow?
Yeah.
How does it grow in your pocket?
Put some seeds in it and close it, and then put some water on it, and pay for it.
and we'll see you next time.